Okay, so you want to own a warhorse, wear a sword at your hip, and ride beneath your own banner as a medieval knight. The image is easy to sell. The hall doors open. Servants carry in food. A lord fastens a reward to your service. Villagers recognize your seal. When war comes, you ride at the front while everyone else moves aside. Then you return from campaign and discover that the horse has to be fed whether there is a war or not. The harness needs work. Metal must be repaired. Your household has eaten through part of its stores. A superior still expects service. The people managing your land report a disappointing harvest. Some of what is owed to you exists as grain, labor, or promises rather than silver you can spend today. You may have status. You may control land. You may even have received payment. And still, you may not have enough usable money to remain a knight. That is the central economic problem hidden inside the armor. A medieval knight is usually imagined as a warrior who acquires wealth by fighting. In practice, fighting is the expensive part. The economic engine is everything that keeps the warrior mounted before the battle and solvent after it. So let us place you in high medieval England, in a society that is becoming more commercial but remains fundamentally agricultural. This is not a balance sheet for every knight in Europe. A knight in England, Castile, northern Italy, or southern France could live under very different laws and customs. Conditions also changed dramatically between the early and late Middle Ages. But the flow of resources reveals a durable pattern. Your sword may establish your reputation. Your assets determine whether you can afford to keep carrying it. You do not begin by walking into a shop and purchasing the profession of knighthood. There is no standardized medieval starter package containing one title, one horse, and a lifetime supply of dramatic sunsets. You enter through relationships. You may be born into a household with property and connections. You may be trained within another lord's household. You may receive support from a patron who expects loyalty and military service. You may control land that produces food, rents, labor, or marketable surplus. In a more monetized setting, you may also serve for payment. But none of these arrangements makes you economically independent by itself. Suppose your family controls an estate. At first, this looks like the safest route. Land is the foundation beneath much of the medieval economy. Fields produce grain. Pastures support animals. Tenants and dependents owe rents, produce labor, or some combination of them. Local markets allow part of that production to be exchanged. From a distance, the estate looks like income. Up close, it looks like work arriving in several inconvenient forms. A portion of the harvest must feed the people who produced it. Seed must be preserved for the next planting. Animals must be maintained. Buildings, roads, tools, mills, boundaries, and storage require attention. Rights must be defended. Obligations to superiors do not disappear simply because the weather was poor. Only what remains after those claims can support your household and military role. This is the first trap. Gross agricultural output is not your personal wealth. It is the entire pile before everyone who helped produce it, everyone with a claim upon it, and next year's survival have taken their share. Imagine that carts arrive after harvest. The barns look full. For a moment, you feel rich. Then the grain begins to leave. Some is consumed, some is owed, some is held back. Some may be sold, but only if there is a buyer, access to a market, and a price worth accepting. What remains in the barn is valuable, but it is not identical to a purse of reliable coin. Your estate can be prosperous while your cash box is nearly empty. That distinction matters because a horse cannot eat prestige and a craftsman may not accept a future harvest when he needs payment now. Medieval exchange did use coin, especially as markets and royal finance became more important, but monetization was uneven. Older relationships based on land, customary service, gifts, maintenance, and obligation continued alongside paid work. Resources could move through the economy without every movement appearing as a cash transaction. That gives you an unusual cash flow problem. Your wealth may be real but difficult to mobilize. You might have future harvests, customary claims, loyalty from dependents, access to pasture, and a respected place in a lord's network. None of that automatically repairs damaged equipment this week. Modern people often divide wealth into income and expenses. For you, there is another division that matters just as much: resources you control and resources you can convert at the moment you need them. The first keeps you important. The second keeps you operational. Now war approaches. This appears to be your revenue opportunity. It is the moment when martial skill should finally justify the entire structure. A ruler or lord needs armed men. Traditional obligations may call you into service, or a more monetized arrangement may offer compensation. Gifts, maintenance, patronage, and paid military labor can coexist. You inspect your horse, you gather attendants, you draw supplies from the household. Work that could have been done on the estate is redirected toward departure. Food, transport, equipment, and manpower begin moving with you. Before you earn anything, you have already consumed resources. This is what makes the economics of knighthood so different from the legend. The battle is not the beginning of the enterprise. It is the final demonstration of a system that has been spending all year to make your appearance possible. The horse had to survive the winter. The equipment had to exist before the summons. The household had to train and maintain the people accompanying you. The estate had to produce enough surplus to release you from ordinary work. A mounted warrior is not merely one man with a weapon. He is the visible end of a long supply chain. Then comes your first apparent victory. The campaign goes well enough. Your service is recognized. Perhaps support is provided during the campaign. Perhaps payment is promised. Perhaps your connection to a powerful lord becomes stronger. You return with the social proof that your investment worked. This is the dangerous moment. You now believe that the thing making you successful is your performance in war. So you spend to match the status that performance appears to have earned. A knight's position is not maintained only in battle. It must also be recognized in peace. A household communicates power. Hospitality creates relationships. Clothing, horses, followers, ceremonies, gifts, and public conduct help establish where you belong in the social order. Status is not simply vanity in this world. It can help you secure patronage, marriage connections, offices, allies, and favorable treatment. Looking powerful can make you more powerful. But status has a carrying cost. The more successful you appear, the more resources you may need to preserve that appearance. Your reputation can rise faster than the productive base supporting it. This is medieval operating leverage. You enlarge the household because your position seems secure. You take on obligations because powerful people now notice you. You commit more resources to military readiness because future service appears likely. Then the next harvest disappoints. The public image has not changed. The expense has. The people attached to your household still need maintenance. Your superior's expectations remain. The horse still consumes feed. Your equipment is still an asset that loses usefulness when neglected. A title does not shrink its costs during a quiet year. In fact, Peace may expose the weakness more clearly than war. War can produce pay, patronage, gifts, advancement, or opportunities. Peace removes some of those possibilities while leaving much of the underlying social and military structure in place. You have built a profession around readiness for an event that may not produce regular income. The knight who survives economically is therefore not necessarily the knight who fights most often. It is the knight whose resource base can survive the intervals. Now, a small problem arrives. One of your key horses can no longer perform the work expected of it. The reason does not need to be dramatic. Animals age, fall ill, suffer injury, or simply fail. What matters is that the horse was not decoration. It connected your military identity to reality. You have a choice. You can redirect household resources toward replacement and preservation of military capacity. You can seek more support from a patron. You can borrow or promise future resources. You can reduce another part of the household. Or you can arrive less prepared and risk damaging the relationship that supports your status. Every option spends something. If you use agricultural surplus, the estate has less resilience. If you depend on a patron, your independence shrinks. If you make promises against the future, next year's resources are already partially gone. If you reduce your visible household, people may read economy as weakness. And if you do nothing, the military function that justified your position begins to fail. This is where the armor finally reveals what it has been hiding. The real product of knightly economics is not combat. It is readiness. Readiness means keeping enough productive assets, household capacity, social credit, equipment, and patronage, aligned so that you can provide force when someone powerful requires it. The battle may last a day, readiness consumes the year. You begin looking more carefully at your estate. The fields are no longer scenery behind the castle. They are the power source. The people recording obligations are not minor administrators. They determine whether claims become usable resources. The cleric or steward who can track rights, stores, debts, and agreements may contribute more to your survival than another impressive weapon. This is not a modern insight imposed on the period. Medieval elite households depended on administration. Religious institutions and secular landholders managed substantial economic assets, and literate clerics could serve as administrators. Success among knights and aristocratic families could rest on accumulating, developing, and strategically using assets. The sword protects the estate. The records explain whether the estate can support the sword. So you make a less glamorous decision. Instead of spending every available resource on the visible symbols of military status, you improve the system underneath them. You protect productive capacity. You avoid treating a full barn as disposable surplus. You maintain relationships that allow produce to reach markets. You keep claims legible and enforceable. You preserve enough reserves to absorb a poor season or a delayed payment. None of this will appear in a heroic poem. That is precisely why it matters. Your neighbor may look more magnificent at the feast. But if his household depends on one patron, one expected payment, or one unusually good harvest, then his splendor is leveraged. A single interruption can force him to sacrifice the assets that were supposed to produce future resources. He may sell or surrender something productive to preserve something visible. That solves the immediate problem and worsens the next one. Less productive capacity means less future surplus. Less surplus means greater dependence on service or patronage. Greater dependence makes it harder to refuse costly demands. Each emergency narrows the range of choices available in the following emergency. A knight can therefore become more impressive while becoming less solvent. The medieval record also warns you against imagining that every knight possessed the same economic foundation. In 13th century usage, in southern France, wealthy lords and bishops could maintain specialized households containing grooms, craftsmen, hunting specialists, cooks, administrators, and sometimes landless knights. Those landless knights reveal the other side of the profession. They possess military status or function, but not necessarily the independent asset base associated with the richest members of their order. Their economic security comes from the household above them. For such a knight, the Lord's Hall is not merely a social center. It is the income system. Food, lodging, equipment, gifts, maintenance, opportunity, and perhaps payment can flow through the patronal relationship. This arrangement solves the enormous entry problem. You do not need to control enough land to reproduce the entire military household yourself. But the solution changes the risk. A landed knight worries about harvests, administration, obligations, and the conversion of produce into usable resources. A landless household knight worries about the patron. If the lord dies, loses political influence, faces financial pressure, changes priorities, or simply prefers another follower, your economic base can disappear without a field failing or a horse falling ill. Your greatest asset is now someone else's continued favor. That is not necessarily a foolish arrangement. It may be the only viable route into service. And a powerful household can provide opportunities that a small independent estate never could. You gain access to networks, protection, military activity, and resources at a scale beyond your personal means. But you do not own the engine. You are part of it. This creates a revealing contrast. The knight with land may appear burdened by administration. The landless retainer may appear free to focus on war. Yet the administrative burden is also a form of independence. The boring work of controlling productive assets gives the landed knight options when patronage shifts. The landless knight has less overhead. He also has less shock absorption. Meanwhile, the wider military economy is changing. As rulers gain greater access to money, they can increasingly employ paid personnel rather than relying exclusively on traditional noble support and gifts. This shift does not happen everywhere at once, and it does not erase older relationships. The two systems coexist for centuries. But coexistence changes the price of your service. When military labor can be purchased, a lord has alternatives. Loyalty, status, and inherited obligations still matter, but so do cash, contracts, and the ability to assemble forces when needed. Your role is no longer protected merely because your family has always performed it. At first, paid service looks like freedom. Instead of waiting for land to yield resources or depending entirely on customary support, you can turn military skill into money. A successful campaign can provide cash that is more flexible than stored produce. You can pay craftsmen, purchase supplies, settle obligations, or strengthen your household. Then the timing problem appears. Your costs begin before the campaign. Payment may depend on attendance, duration, political decisions, or the fiscal health of whoever promised it. Even when the amount is honorable, the promise is not the same thing as coin in your hand. If payment arrives late, the campaign may be profitable on paper and ruinous in practice. Your household has already supplied the service. Food has been consumed. Equipment has been used. Agricultural work may have been disrupted. Creditors and dependents cannot live inside a future royal promise. This is the medieval version of a business that has made a sale but cannot meet payroll. The income exists as a claim. The cash problem exists now. And money itself does not eliminate uncertainty. Medieval coinage was fragmented across regions and periods. Metal content, weight, acceptability, and local availability could matter. In places where coin was scarce, people relied more heavily on payment in kind, barter, running accounts, or credit relationships. So even the phrase paid in money requires another question. Paid in what, accepted where, and available when? You now understand why land remains attractive even as cash becomes more important. Land is slow, seasonal, administratively demanding, and exposed to agricultural failure. But it produces the food, rents, labor, and surplus that keep the household alive when cash payments become uncertain. Money gives flexibility. Assets give endurance. The strongest knightly position combines them rather than mistaking one for the other. You preserve a productive base, but you also cultivate access to markets and paid opportunities. You remain valuable to a patron without making that patron your only economic pillar. You use military rewards to strengthen the assets that support future service, rather than immediately converting every reward into a larger display of status. That choice is profoundly unromantic. It is also how power compounds. A gift used for spectacle creates one impressive evening. A gift used to repair productive capacity may support years of hospitality, service, and bargaining power. A payment spent on another symbol of rank proves that you succeeded once. A payment used to reduce dependence makes it easier to survive the next failure. This is the difference between consumption that imitates wealth and investment that reproduces it. Now imagine another campaign opportunity arrives. The Lord expects you. Success could increase your standing. Refusal could weaken an important relationship. But the estate has just endured a difficult season, and your reserves are thin. You can go at full display, drawing heavily from the household, and hoping the campaign restores what it consumes. You can go more cautiously, preserving resources but risking the appearance that your status has declined. Or you can decline, protecting the estate while gambling with patronage. There is no decision without loss. If you go, you may spend resources that cannot be replaced quickly. If you remain, you may lose access to the network that makes your title useful. This is why the most important medieval economic decisions are often not about maximizing profit. They are about choosing which dependency is least dangerous. Depend too heavily on land, and agricultural disruption can immobilize you. Depend too heavily on cash service, and delayed or unstable payment can break the household. Depend too heavily on a patron, and one political change can remove your support. Spend too little on status, and your network weakens. Spend too much, and the network survives while the estate underneath it disappears. The successful strategy is not to eliminate obligation. That is impossible. It is to prevent one obligation from gaining control over every other resource. Now your three possible futures come into view. In the strongest future, you manage assets more carefully than your rivals. Your estate produces enough surplus to support the household without consuming its own foundations. Paid service and patronage add flexible resources, but neither becomes indispensable. When a horse fails or payment is delayed, reserves absorb the shock. You remain ready, and readiness makes you useful. Usefulness attracts more opportunity. You do not become secure because every year goes well. You become secure because one bad year does not force you to destroy the source of the next good one. In the middle future, the estate functions, but only just. Most of its surplus disappears into household maintenance, obligations, military readiness, and the visible costs of rank. You possess land and status, yet little discretionary wealth. A favorable campaign or harvest gives temporary relief. A poor season removes it. You are not destitute. You are trapped in expensive importance. From the outside, you belong to an elite. Inside the household, every commitment is competing for the same limited surplus. Your standard of living may be higher than that of most people around you, but so is the cost of preserving the position that provides it. Then there is the fragile future. You expand your display after one success. You rely on a promised payment or one powerful patron. A weak harvest reduces the estate's surplus. The horse problem arrives at the same time. You borrow against future resources or surrender a productive asset to meet the immediate obligation. The next year begins with less capacity and more dependence. When another demand arrives, you cannot solve it without giving up something else. Eventually, you still possess the identity of a knight, but not the economic machinery that makes the identity sustainable. The final failure may look sudden. The causes accumulated quietly: one delayed payment, one badly managed asset, one unnecessary display, one productive resource sacrificed to preserve appearances. There is no single annual salary that can tell us what a medieval knight earned. The category includes men with substantial assets, men dependent on great households, and men operating between older feudal obligations and increasingly monetized military service. The surviving evidence does not support one universal cost of armor, one standard wage, one average estate, or one reliable return on knighthood across medieval Europe. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It is the story. Knight describes a military and social status, not one standardized economic condition. Two men may carry the same title while one controls productive land and the other depends on a place at someone else's table. One may receive resources as produce, rights, gifts, and service. Another may seek coin through paid military work. Their armor may look similar, while their risk could not be more different. So what do you actually earn? If you are a household-dependent knight, your return may be maintenance, access, protection, gifts, opportunity, and status, rather than a clean cash surplus. Lose the patron, and much of that return vanishes. If you control productive assets, your reward may include household consumption, political influence, military capacity, and any surplus left after obligations and reinvestment. But the value of the estate is not the same as cash you can spend, and preserving it may absorb much of what it produces. If you combine assets, administration, patronage, and paid service successfully, you may build a position that lasts beyond a single campaign. The return is not merely money. It is independence, the ability to refuse one demand because your entire life does not depend on accepting it. And what can you lose? Not only coin. You can lose productive land, future claims, animals, equipment, household loyalty, political protection, or the patronage that gave your status practical meaning. Some losses can be repaired after a good season. Others permanently reduce your ability to recover. Return on investment is therefore measured less by how much treasure you carry home than by whether the system supporting you is stronger afterward. We can now return to the opening image. The hall is still full. The horse is still waiting. The sword still hangs at your side. People still see a warrior who appears to live from courage, violence, and noble reward. But you see something else. You see fields turning sunlight into grain. You see administrators turning obligations into records. You see markets turning surplus into coin. You see patrons turning loyalty into maintenance. You see a household turning all of those resources into one mounted man who can appear when summoned. The armor was never the business. It was the expense that proved the business underneath it was working. A medieval knight did not truly live by the sword. He lived by the assets, relationships, and reserves that allowed him to keep drawing it.